What's up, guys? Welcome. This is MC Darvel, and today is another time lapse. This time it's going to be Princess Zelda, the warrior archer. Let's get rolling with that time lapse. So, this drawing proceeded in, I guess you'd say, 4 or 5 different phases, starting with, as you see here, gathering some of the reference. I'm going to be drawing Zelda riding a horse and drawing a bow, and so this is only like the 3rd or 4th time I've ever drawn a horse, so it was a little bit of a challenge for me, but in the end I quite enjoyed it. I really like how or the aesthetic of horses and how their musculature is, and I found it actually kind of similar to how a human musculature is set up. So yeah, I think I might draw some more horses. So as I said, there are kind of 4 phases to this: the planning with a thumbnail, just to make sure that the initial energy is there. I think there was a couple of drafts to this where I had chosen a particular pose for the princess, but wasn't, fully satisfied with it, so I went to a different pose, and then at the end you'll see I actually kind of changed the horse a little bit, but we'll get to that in due time. So here I'm using Sketchbook Pro program. That's the program that I prefer for sketching and drawing. I'll also move into Photoshop from time to time, and I use Photoshop for a couple of things. One is if I wanted to warp something in the drawing. For instance, I'll be drawing the horse actually as a unicorn / Pegasus, and I wanted to move the wings around, or warp the wings, to make them look more like they're flapping. So I brought that into Photoshop and used the warp tool for that. I also use Photoshop if I'm not satisfied with the line weight that I've chosen. So if I have my line art on a layer, on its own layer, I can either thicken or thin that using the stroke feature in Photoshop, and I'll show that a little bit later. But back to the drawing. I wanted to draw a female. I think I've drawn pretty much exclusively males on this channel so far, but I wanted to draw a female this time, and I thought of Princess Zelda. I kind of like her character, and I like how she could be a badass sometimes. I've always found it kind of weird that the video game is named Zelda, when in at least the first few versions of the game, she didn't really have much of a role, and it's all about Link, and everybody knows the confusion that some people have with thinking that the main character, Link, is actually Zelda. But yeah, I wonder what the creators Takashi Tezuka and Shigeru Miyamoto were thinking when they decided to name the video game after the princess. My theory is that, well, Zelda is just a really cool name, so it's really catchy, and people will look at that and say, oh, this could be interesting. Now, I do wonder also where they got the name. Did they take it from Zelda Fitzgerald, who was F. Scott Fitzgerald's wife? And on that note, there's actually a really good show about the first few years of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Fitzgerald's marriage. It's a show on Amazon Prime, I think. It's either called Zelda or Z. I'm not sure. But Christina Ricci plays Zelda Fitzgerald. It's pretty good. I recommend going to check it out. So we're in what I'd consider the first draft of this picture, and I wanted to have the princess leaning on something or resting her weight on something. And I've spoken in previous videos about having a character interact with the environment, and this is part of that exercise, in that instead of just having a single character kind of just floating in space, I prefer to have them at least touching something or in the same space as something else, and have it come through very clearly from the drawing that, these two objects or more objects are part of the same environment. So here's where I'm going into Photoshop and trying to change the line weight with the stroke tool. I think I wanted to make it a thinner line weight, so I would stroke inside with white. That will thin the line art. I noticed that it actually left a little bit of a gray outline, and I think I'll have to figure out how to get rid of that. But either way, I ended up not even going with this version. Again, this was draft 1. Pretty soon I'll just realize that I'm not too happy with this draft and start moving things around a little bit more. So as I was drawing this, and I spent about 6 hours on it, I sent versions to a couple of my friends, and I also showed my spouse, and she mentioned that the princess looked like she should probably be leaning more towards the camera. And I had considered that actually in the beginning. If you look at some of my initial sketches of the pose, I did try a couple of versions with her leaning more towards the camera, but I decided I wanted to include her figure and her face more prominently in the picture, so I made a little bit of a compromise and made at least that part of her a little less accurate, I suppose. I also went from having her completely straddling the horse to adopting a more quote-unquote ladylike pose. I thought it would be an interesting contrast to show her taking that sort of like side-sitting stance on the horse while drawing this bow. Maintaining her royal image and feminine countenance, while still being quite a badass with her archery. So at this point I was a little bit exasperated with the drawing, and just something wasn't working out, and again considered stopping, but thought I'd push on and see if I could really optimize the drawing. And so I start a different pose entirely here. I thought that the original figure was a little bit too small, so I made her upper body a little bit larger. also struggled a little bit with the arm that's drawing the bowstring. I do like it sort of parallel with the arrow. That's nice, but something about that interrupts the flow a little bit. So I'll eventually move the arm down a little bit. I have to say I'm a little bit more pleased with how her face turned out in this version. I tend to draw female faces very similar to the way I drew it in the previous version, and it's just one of those things for me is hard to get away from when you have a particular way of drawing a face, and you want to draw it not that way, so you have to force yourself to take a different a route or tactic to achieving that. So I also decided that I would like to see this colored, but I didn't want to do that myself, so I'm hiring somebody to do that, and they have agreed to screen record their process and let me put it up on YouTube. So I think that if everything works out, we'll be able to show you that coloring process. Here we're approaching the end of the second draft, working on the position of her elbow there, and that was another decision that one of my friends didn't like, but another friend did like, and I was leaning more towards liking the elbow down, so I decided to keep it there, because at least one person liked it better. So I thought this was going to be pretty much the end, which is why I kind of put a more gray backdrop there to really make the princess and the horse pop out. But then I thought that the horse looked a little bit stale, like it was conforming too much to symmetry about its own axis, and I wanted to twist it around a little bit and make it look like it was, undergoing some sort of turn. Just put a little bit more chaos into the picture. So again, I asked my friends, and they were like, well, stop messing around with it. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm satisfied with the way it was, but I wanted to keep pushing the envelope. So they gave me suggestions, and one of my friends suggested to put the wings in a different position, and previously that drawing with the wings right there with the blue was his suggestion, and I thought it looked really great, so I just kept that. Then my other friend suggested bringing the legs more angled towards the camera and more bent, like as if in a running stance. And I also thought that was a great idea, so they were just 2 home runs, one after the other. So put them into practice, and I thought it turned out really well with those ideas. It's always difficult for the artist to know when a picture is done, and you hear a lot of people say you just know it when you know it, and that was true in this case. I just kind of knew when it was done. I didn't really have a checklist or anything. I'm sure I could fiddle around with it a little bit more, but I figured just let it be and see how the coloring comes out. So here I'm just changing the line weight of the horse. I think I'm just thickening it a little bit. And that's the final line art drawing. Very soon, hope to have the colored version of this. So if you liked this video, go ahead and hit that like button. If you didn't like it, hit the dislike. Subscribe and hit the bell if you want to see more from me. And thank you very much for joining me in drawing Zelda the Princess Archer. Later, guys.